All right, better late than never. It's been a minute since our last lab talk. Lazy Danny. Well, a summer conference, endless revisions, and yes, Danny doesn't do stress. But here we are. One more episode before the summer break. Okay, Podcastle, let's do this. Okay. Boris is already in the waiting room, so hip hop hooray.
The Community Lab, your podcast that connects professional communication research, practice, and people.
Hi, and welcome to the Community Lab. I'm Danny, your host and communication nerd, and you've just tuned in to a very special lab talk on mindful organizing and how ethnographic methods can help even non-academics better understand and improve their organizations in evidence-based, grounded, and yes, mindful ways. And who better to guide us through this than Professor Boris Brummans from the University of Montreal. Boris was my office neighbor in 2019 during my first research stay in Montreal, and later became a key member of my doctoral committee. Tough but fair, sharp yet kind. Thanks again, Boris. In this 10th episode, and my final one here in Montreal, we explore what mindful organizing actually means and why it is inherently communicative and relational. But we don't stop there. Boris also makes the case for ethnography, not just as a scholarly pursuit, but as a practical and powerful tool for people outside the ivory tower to make sense of their organizations and even improve them. No PhD required. So, take a breath, find your mental hammock, and join us for a conversation that's reflective, thoughtful, and, we hope, just the right kind of inspiring. Enjoy! Hi Boris, welcome to the Community Lab. Thanks for joining the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Boris, before we chat about your academic journey and your research, I give the floor to ChatGPT, which, as always, has created a brief introduction of my guest, namely you. So let's see what it has hallucinated this time.
Boris H.J.M. Brummans is a professor in the Department of Communication at Université de Montréal. A leading figure in organizational communication, Professor Brummans delves into areas such as agency, mindful organizing, organizational ethnography, process philosophy, and qualitative inquiry. His scholarly contributions include numerous articles in esteemed journals like the Academy of Management Review, Communication Monographs, and Organization Studies. Notably, his edited volume, The Agency of Organizing, received the 2018 Outstanding Edited Book Award from the National Communication Association's Organizational Communication Division, and he co-edited the Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research in Organizational Communication, which earned the same accolade in 2024. Beyond his publications, Professor Brummans has served as Associate Editor of Management Communication Quarterly and chaired the Organizational Communication Division of the International Communication Association from 2022 to 2024. ChatGPT thinks of Professor Brummans as one of the rare scholars who dares to slow things down literally. His work on mindfulness, agency, and process philosophy doesn't just challenge conventional views of organizational life. It invites us to rethink what it means to organize, to relate, and to be human in a complex world. His ideas don't just describe, they provoke, inspire, and expand the horizon of what organizational communication can be.
All right, ChatGPT, thank you so much. So, Boris, what are your thoughts on this introduction? And please enlighten us. What do your initials stand for?
To start with, HJM, I was born in the Netherlands,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a Catholic region. It think it's still fairly Catholic, even though it has become secularized. And so Hubertus Jacobus Marie, that's what it stands for.
Okay.
Hubertus is my father's name as well as my great-grandfather's name.
Uh-huh.
Jacobus is Jacques, that's my godfather, and Marie is my godmother.
Ah, okay.
And it's in my passport like that, so it's an enormously long name.
Mm-hmm.
And for publication purposes, I just put the initials in there because it's my official name. But nobody calls me Hubertus, or let alone my Marie.
Okay. So there's no nickname based on your middle names or something like that?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay. Okay.
And with regard to ChatGPT, I mean, it's interesting how ChatGPT, of course, sort of scans the web for information.
Yeah.
And what it looks at is generally what people do and what they accomplish. And what I find interesting is that it doesn't show sort of the trajectory of a person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it also doesn't show that, they say it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
It takes a village to raise a scholar or a professor as well. And so, it sort of pinpoints all these individual accomplishments.
Yeah.
As we will probably talk about more. And there's a whole field of relation and a set of conditions that allow me to do what I do and that have allowed me to do what I've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so ChatGPT doesn't show that at all because it doesn't know.
Mm-hmm. True. So you're not flattered because many guests are flattered because it always is like, not exaggerating, but, very, very flattery. Is like, you're a beacon or you're a powerhouse. I mean, it said like you slow things down. I don't know if that's insulting or if you agree with that, but yeah.
No, it's interesting because, I mean, again, I think ChatGPT has been trained to highlight, certain kinds of strengths or, qualities of people.
Mm.
And yes, it's flattering to hear, but it doesn't really reflect the reality of a lived life.
Mm.
And that's what I find interesting about ChatGPT. I've been working with ChatGPT for a while now, an ongoing dialogue, and you can train it in a different way to become less sort of always trying to serve you and to please you. And so I find that process very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Okay, good, great. And so let's continue. Before we dig into your research, I'd love to rewind a bit. I'm curious, what sparked your interest in communication in the first place? Was there a particular moment, person, or question that pulled you into the communication field?
Absolutely. Long time ago, I was doing policy and organization studies in the Netherlands at Tilburg University.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a professor called Professor de Moor. And if I'm not mistaken, he was a psychiatrist by training, who had gotten interested in conflict management and organizational communication.
Mm-hmm.
And this person introduced to me my training overall was very quantitative, very social, scientific.
Mm-hmm.
And he introduced me to ideas that I thought were mind-blowing. He introduced me to the work of Karl Weick,
mm-hmm.
for example, who's been interested in, looking at organizations from a different perspective. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more maybe when we talk about mindful organizing.
Mm-hmm.
But he introduced me to lots of different kinds of ideas. Among those ideas was the field of organizational communication.
Yeah.
And so I started reading more about organizational communication. And at that point, email started to become popular. Packet mail, it was called at that time.
Okay.
90s. I decided to send an email to a professor in the United States at Michigan State University called Peter Manning, who had written a book called Organizational Communication.
Okay.
And he suggested that I come to Michigan State University to do a master's in communication studies. And that's what I did. And that's the beginning of everything.
The beginning of the end.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. No, that's great. And so you were like in this master's program in organizational communication, and then you were hooked. Like, wow, this is what I want to do.
Absolutely. Yes. It was interesting because at Michigan State University, the program is known to be very focused on experimental design and quantitative methods. And so it gave me a strong sort of grounding in that way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been somebody who likes to sort of push the envelope.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having conversations with professors in the classroom about, the difference between poetry and the scientific method.
Okay.
And so I wanted to develop, different ways of doing communication research. And for that reason, I ended up going to Texas A&M University for a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I really developed a sort of love for ethnographic methods. Talk about this a little bit later as well.
Yeah.
For qualitative research. And after that, what happened was there was a job announcement for the University of Montreal, which I deleted because I didn't speak any French.
Yeah.
And then my advisor said, well, maybe you could still inquire and maybe they will give you some time to learn the language. And that's what they did. And I ended up here in Montreal and I've never left.
Mm-hmm. How's your French? I mean, it must be better than mine for sure.
I get by. Yes. After 20 years. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right. Now, if we step away from the academic lens, when you hear the word communication, what does it evoke in you on a personal level? So how does it shape how you move through the world, both inside and outside academia?
It's a really great question because...
Thank you.
So when I talked about Professor de Moor
Mm-hmm.
and him introducing me to Carl Weick, the idea that really got me started was the idea of sense making.
Mm-hmm.
How do people create meaning in the world? And that has always fascinated me. But over the years, I've come to see communication as a question of creating relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, maybe even more so, relationships are creating us.
Yeah, true.
We consider ourselves to be individuals, but we are individuals because we're related to one another. And this is not only to other human beings, but anything in the world,
Mm-hmm.
to nature, to organizations, to the universe. And so I believe that, communication expresses this relationality.
Mm-hmm.
For me, communication becomes not just a matter of exchanging messages, but actually of maintaining or sustaining those relational fields.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that sounds too abstract, but it's an expression of relationality.
Mm-hmm. You also keep that in mind when you interact, for example, with your students, with your colleagues, but also like with your family and friends?
Absolutely. Relationship is everything to me when I'm in the classroom, when I'm talking to colleagues, when I'm interacting with my children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because if you start focusing on the in-between or the things that connect us, it's this kind of fabric of social life,
mm-hmm.
suddenly everything changes. Your perspective changes because when you relate to one another on that level, then you start to become more attuned to what's important for other people as well as for yourself. It doesn't mean that you have to erase yourself completely.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like this word attunement, where you're tuning to the other person or the tree that's around you or the bike that you're driving or, anything that you're relating with.
Mm-hmm.
And it also makes you very sensitive to the situations in which you find yourself.
Yeah.
And that goes along very much later on when we might talk a little bit more about mindfulness, is being attuned to whatever a situation requires or demands.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not so much living in a sort of very planned, controlled way, but being open to whatever happens.
Yeah, wise words. And when I was listening to you, something popped up in my mind, because the famous communication scholar Arnold Schwarzenegger once said, when he also talked about relationality, and it was like self-made millionaires that doesn't exist because we always are related to others or we are dependent on others. Without the help of others, we wouldn't become millionaires. So self-made, that doesn't exist.
Wow.
So one of the most famous Austrian-American communication scholars for sure.
I think people know this. Everybody knows this.
Yeah.
But I do think that in the global north, especially, but it's actually all around the world, individuality is being celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we see, even when we're on social media or wherever we look nowadays. And so what we don't see is like what I said with regard to ChatGPT, what's underneath. We don't see the process, we don't see the trajectory of a person, and the relationality or the community. Is it a podcast about community?
Yeah.
So that's what it requires.
I agree. Cool. Let's get a bit more specific, I would say. So let's talk about some of the ideas you've been contributing to the discipline. One of the areas you're best known for is your work on mindful organizing, which invites you to rethink how organizations function, interact, and ultimately care. So let's delve into that.
Yes, of course.
You've conducted fieldwork in some fascinating places. A Buddhist monastery in the Himalayas, the Tzu Chi Foundation in Taiwan, and also Doctors Without Borders in Africa. So how did you find yourself in these environments, and what did they teach you about how people organize through and in everyday communication?
Those fieldwork experiences have been extremely formative to me.
Mm-hmm.
I have been a bit of a wanderer in my career because at some point, we say in the Netherlands to follow your nose, but it's more like I follow kind of my gut.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, for example, about Ladakh.
Mm-hmm.
I always, since I was very young, I was interested in Buddhist philosophy as a 16-year-old or 17-year-old sitting in the sun trying to meditate and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where that interest came from, I don't really know, but it was a kind of pull from Asia in that regard. And, because Buddhism originated in Asia, to go and explore that kind of life.
Mm-hmm.
In my career, I started with organization studies and organizational communication. And so for a long time, it was just sort of like a side interest.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I arrived here in Montreal, the university sort of asks you to apply for research grants.
Yeah.
And at that moment in my life, the wisest thing would have been to continue on the path that I was on, to continue with my dissertation research and develop a research program around that.
Yeah.
That seemed not a good idea to me.
Okay.
And I had heard about Ladakh. Ladakh is the region where I've been doing a lot of my work in India.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting area in the world where you have military bases all around and Buddhist monasteries in the same place.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because it's close to Pakistan and Tibet.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very sort of sensitive, politically sensitive zones. But it's also the place where Buddhism is being practiced in a very sort of traditional way.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a whole year, I tried to get away into Ladakh. It was very difficult. I would call the Ladakh Buddhist Association, leave messages. Nobody would call me back.
Okay.
But ultimately, I ended up finding the International Association for Ladakh Studies.
Mm-hmm.
And they helped me find an informant in Ladakh. And so in 2006, for the first time I went there,
mm-hmm.
It might sound a little bit cheesy, but it felt like a homecoming.
That's cheesy indeed, yeah.
Not so much in terms of place, because it couldn't be more different from the Netherlands, where I was born.
Mm-hmm.
But the ways in which people were relating to one another was so different from what I had been used to.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting in the monastery, so just sitting next to people, monks.
Yeah.
And just really enjoying being together in each other's presence without having to say much.
Mm-hmm.
To see their round of life sort of unfold every day in a totally different tempo, with a different regard for time,
mm-hmm.
and an enormous sense of care for one another and for the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
It was like coming home. Like, I often wish that I had been born there.
Okay.
Which is not to say that I don't like the Netherlands, but it just felt like a very familiar place, a kind of way of relating that I really appreciated and valued, still do.
Mm-hmm.
That led me to think very much about organizing in a very different way.
Yeah.
Can we organize from that sense of care?
Mm-hmm. And without saying a lot, right?
Exactly. We emphasize so much, the written word, the spoken word. You need to have an opinion about things. You need to develop yourself as an individual in institutional and organizational contexts.
Mm-hmm.
But there it was much more a question of selflessness and collectivity and community and, all the words that we've just been using. Interestingly, in Taiwan, the Tzu Chi Foundation couldn't be more different from a traditional Buddhist monastery that I studied in India, because it's a huge international humanitarian organization, but grounded in Buddhist principles. But they, have a huge budget. They have their own satellite television station. They have recycling stations across Taiwan, and they operate all around the world. But even there, in that organization, again, I noticed a sense of selflessness and care really had become part of the fabric of their ways of doing things every day. Even at MSF, the Médecins Sans Frontières, so Doctors Without Borders, that same sense of care I can see. But again, what is interesting is because, it's a very different culturally, the history of the organization is very different. But you see, I became more and more interested in organizations that, express that sense of care in their organizing. I've been looking for those kinds of organizations ever since.
Okay, cool. I'm curious. Actually, you were curious, but I'm curious too. Was it through that fieldwork you have been describing that you came to the idea of mindful organizing? So, for example, in the monastery. And can you tell us what mindful organizing is and what it means to you?
Mindful organizing is actually a term that was developed by Carl Weick.
Oh, really? Okay.
I do believe that he invented the term. So when I was doing the field work in Ladakh, and I came back after my first field work, I wanted to start writing about this and sort of sharing the insights and the experiences that I had with other people. And around that time, mindfulness started to become a thing. Organizations like Google or even the US Army, everybody started doing mindfulness training. Carl Weick was writing about it in a way that I could appropriate the concept in order for me to start talking about my own field work.
Okay.
And so mindful organizing has become kind of the main concept that I have been working on over the last 20 years. But mindfulness itself is only a little aspect of Buddhism for me.
Yeah.
It's a much larger kind of philosophy underneath it. When I talk about mindful organizing, I still secretly talk about Buddhist organizing.
Okay. I won't tell anybody.
It actually starts from two premises. The idea of interdependence and impermanence. The second one is impermanence.
Okay.
These are basic premises in Buddhist philosophy that you sort of have to accept if you want to use that perspective. Permanence, things fall apart. Nothing is really permanent, even though it may seem like it is permanent. Example is a rock. Hold it in your hand. You can kind of feel the life trajectory of a rock. It feels very solid, but we know very well that on a deeper level, it's an ongoing process. And so that rock ultimately, might fall apart or might get destroyed or might change or erode and things like that. That idea of impermanence I find very interesting because we often have a tendency to rigidify things, to fix things, to believe that things are things.
Yeah.
And so the second principle of interdependence is important here because nothing exists in a vacuum. The conditions that are necessary for something to become a thing are extremely important, but we often don't see them. Just like I was saying that, you might speak about Boris Brummans as an individual scholar, but you don't see all the conditions that were necessary for this particular person to become who he has become.
Yeah.
And so for me, mindful organizing is being aware of those two aspects when we're organizing. And then operating from that awareness. And, when you start being aware of those two aspects, which I believe are quite fundamental in life, then it's quite difficult not to start to care for other people, for other sentient beings, for the world around you, for the relational fields to which you are contributing and which are also contributing to you. And so I started asking myself, can we see this kind of mindful organizing in other places? And so I started in Ladakh. And then I started noticing this also in Taiwan, in the Tzu Chi Foundation. And then I started thinking about, what about other kinds of contexts? Can we see this form of mindful organizing in other contexts as well? If you start looking for it, you start noticing.
Yeah.
And I think it's a matter of noticing and developing and cultivating this kind of awareness, which is possible. You can do this in an organization. And there are Western examples as well that you can think of organizations that are cultivating this kind of awareness and this kind of care for relationality.
In terms of communication, mindful organizing, when you think of impermanence and interdependency, when you studied mindful organizing, was there something that stood out in terms of communication? Is there a specific type of communication or types of communication that also symbolizes care or foster care? Did you find something like that?
It's often in what is not said.
Okay.
It often expresses itself before you say something.
That's interesting.
It often expresses itself in feeling potential for something rather than right before something actualizes itself. For example, the monks I was living with for quite a while. At some point, I think it was in 2012, I came home. Well, home. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I came home to my room in the monastery.
Okay.
And it suddenly started to rain. Initially, I didn't think much of it. But within no time, the rain became so strong and there was lightning and everything. It was very dramatic being in the Himalayas in an isolated area. Before you knew it, water was coming through the roof of my room. And then the ground started to shake, and I had never been in this kind of situation before. And all throughout the night, it created a huge mudslide.
Okay.
Which destroyed a large part of the school. There was a school for children down below, and there was a road. There was only one road to the monastery, and a large part of that road got destroyed.
Wow.
And during that particular event, I sort of sat there initially as a researcher, but then you have to drop that hat because the situation demands other kinds of things of you.
Yeah, of course.
I remember when the rain started, I tried to film it, but soon I was like, okay, I better stop filming now because I take care of other things.
Yeah.
And so what I noticed during that event, and especially also afterwards, was the kind of care, how it expressed itself. And the ways in which the monks continuously, for example, they had a lot of things to do to protect, for example, sacred objects and statues. And down below, there were children who needed to be saved. But all throughout the night, they would come and check up on me. They'd come and see how I was doing. And I actually became sort of involved. I was sitting in front of a temple. I noticed that the monks were trying to protect certain statues from being washed away by the rain.
Yeah.
And so somehow I took it upon myself to start helping them with that. So the care expressed itself a lot through a touch, looking at each other in the eyes and not saying much, or saying a few words, and doing what was necessary. I don't think that is particularly true for this particular community. I'm 100% sure that you see this kind of care express itself in other situations as well. I mean, when we were talking to the Tzu Chi volunteers who would go all around the world also for disaster relief, same thing.
Okay.
Same expression of attunement, of care, of really looking at what is necessary in a selfless way. It's interesting in those situations of disaster where how quickly you forget about yourself. There is, surprisingly, a kind of awareness or even a kind of wisdom inside of everybody, any one of us, that expresses itself in those situations. And of course you make mistakes and things go wrong and you're not perfect, but you're not looking for perfection. You're looking for what seems to be the best in that moment. Carl Weick is a good example of a team of firefighters who are asked in the middle of a forest fire to drop their tools. If I remember it well, some of these firefighters were unable to drop their tools because that was part of their training.
Mhm.
Without those tools, you couldn't be a firefighter.
Yeah.
I think the article that he wrote suggests that that was one of the reasons for why they didn't make it out.
Mhm.
Why, in that kind of a situation, why are we holding on to particular routines or ideas of ourselves and things like that?
Yeah.
That is what interests me.
Mhm. Fascinating stuff, and I'm happy you got out safe from this thunderstorm and mudslide. It sounds terrible, but also maybe enlightening for you, because it also had like a huge impact on your trajectory as a scholar as well. So as a person and as a scholar, right?
Yes, these kinds of events, they do change your. I mean, they show you impermanence in action.
Mm.
But we all have that. It's not just, I mean, somebody passes away, there is disease, relationships break up. I mean, we are confronted with this all the time. You lose your job. And so then the question becomes, how do you compose with that?
Yeah.
With those particular moments in life that are very difficult. And there's no recipe for it. But I do believe that this kind of awareness that I've been talking about, that we all share, has a kind of depth to it that allows us to act in resilient ways. And I think tapping into that awareness and co-cultivating that awareness is what would benefit many organizations.
Mhm. I agree. In your work, you also build on Ron Peirce's critique of mindfulness. And in your opinion, how has mindfulness been translated into modern secular organizations? And what gets lost in that translation process?
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually initially wanted to be a kind of, or act as a kind of translator. Go to India, do my field work, come back and help translate those ideas into organizing practices that could be useful in the global north. And very, very quickly, I found out that's not going to work.
Okay.
And Ron Purser, I actually had the great fortune of meeting him in San Francisco many years ago. And he developed a really interesting critique of exactly that.
Okay.
You cannot just take a century-old philosophy that has many different expressions in terms of different schools and things like that, and then just go into Google and just say like, okay, like how can we take a few things from that and use it in order to boost productivity under the guise of a human well-being, of promoting the well-being of our employees.
Yeah.
And so he came up with this great term called like mindfulness, which is a kind of commodification of mindfulness. But it's really sort of a commodification of just a slither of Buddhist philosophy. And I think that his critique is especially this idea that it has been used often to give employees the impression that an organization cares for them, but ultimately wants them to just work harder or do more. I mean, we're living in this kind of era where more is better. And the kind of environments in which I've done my field work, I've really learned that less is more.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to translate that, because it would actually sort of mean that you'd have to transpose that culture to, let's say, Google, to a Western organization. And you cannot do that because it doesn't share the same values.
I agree.
So ChatGPT mentioned this recent article that we published in Academy of Management Review. And in the article, we really talk about the importance of starting with values. What is important for the organization? From what is important for the organization, then you can actually sort of develop communicative practices that allow those values to be expressed in organizing practices. And so if you look at the Buddhist monastery, I mean, the values are completely different from, a for-profit organization.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's where I think something happens in the translation, something gets lost. Unless you want to question those values of the organization and change those values. And that's totally possible. But it requires a major overhaul and a deep kind of a collective sort of awareness for what it is that we want to achieve and accomplish as an organization.
Thanks, Boris. Now, if we take the ideas of mindful organizing seriously, it also raises the question of how can organizations really get a grip on what's happening within their own walls? So in earlier lab talks, some guests talk about the value of surveys to inform things like internal communication and employee psychological safety, for example. But your perspective opens the door to something deeper, namely using ethnographic methods, not just as academic tools, but as practical ways for organizations to study themselves. So whether it's tracking how change processes unfold over time or gaining insights into everyday team dynamics, for example, ethnography seems to offer a very rich and nuanced view. So let's talk about it. Are you up for doing this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Great. So many of the most important things that happen at work are subtle, such as tensions, moods, and atmospheres. In your work, you've used creative ethnographic methods like drawing movements or paying close attention to micro moments to study these subtleties. So I'm curious, how can people working in organizations develop a so-called ethnographic eye? In other words, what are some practical ways people in organizations, not just leaders or communication professionals, but anyone can start noticing subtle dynamics and use the awareness to support meaningful change? That's very long.
No, it's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is this quote by Blake, I think William Blake, this idea of the world in a grain of sand. When we think about the micro, we often think that it's very trivial and futile to think about, the way we look at somebody, the silences that connect us, the space that is necessary for designing something. In Japanese culture, they talk about negative space.
Okay.
So, if you think about a room, space is just as much necessary as the objects that are in it.
Yeah.
Without space, there would be no possibility of even, living in a room. And so we often think about the micro, the things that are invisible, as trivial.
Yeah.
And what I've learned through doing ethnographic work is that there's a possibility of tapping into those things and seeing how they actually make a difference and how important they are for the lives that we lead. And so ethnography, the way I understand it, is a matter of understanding on that sort of subtle level.
Yeah.
And to see how communication expresses itself in those kinds of ways, which doesn't mean I'm still interested in language, in what people say. But I'm also interested in what I would call the extra-linguistic, what is beyond language. And I don't want to create a duality here, like language versus non-language or anything like that. I think it's all working together.
Yeah.
When you do this kind of work, often what it requires is to become a member of an organization or a group or the people you're interested in, which I did, for example, in India, but also in Taiwan, the Tzu Chi Foundation. I started volunteering. I actually did this work with my wife, who is from Taiwan. And we would wake up early in the morning at 6 o'clock, maybe even earlier, and in the middle of the summer in Taiwan, go and do recycling with volunteers. That made all the difference. Like, I could have sent out a survey, but actually sitting there in the heat and doing the recycling work and feeling dirty suddenly gave me an understanding of why these volunteers were doing what they were doing, and also what it takes to do this kind of work. I think ethnography is useful for organizations who want to understand the deeper values that are underlying, their operations. Yeah. It is useful for people who really want to understand what employees are going through on a daily basis. Not just, small talk, not just impression management, but what's happening in the kitchen, near the water coolers, what's happening maybe outside when people are smoking a cigarette. And it's often in those moments where organizing also happens. It doesn't happen only on a sort of formal level. ethnography opens up a whole range of techniques that you can use to tap into sort of this backstage. If you think about it in terms of front stage and backstage, what you can do, for example, is to start. It's a question of noticing.
Yeah.
You start a meeting, get a sense of the room. What are people talking about informally when decisions are made? What leads up to the decision? How do people talk? Are certain people taking over the discussion? Are there certain people who are always silent? Do you notice certain expressions of tension or even of sort of latent conflict? For that, you need to be very observant. Sometimes you need to ask questions about that. So in ethnography, you use observation as well as interviewing, note-taking, transcribing or inscribing those kinds of observations that you have, and doing this over a prolonged period of time. Ethnography is not something that you can do very quickly.
So how long should this period be? Or is there a minimum?
No, there's no minimum, but I, for example, went to India for many summers. But if you are a member of the organization already, then it could become part of your daily life. If you are an organizational leader or a manager, it just requires sometimes putting on sort of the ethnographer hat, doing it at the same time while you're leading a meeting, while you're giving a presentation, attuning to the atmosphere in the room, asking the questions that everybody is avoiding, trying to find out what people are really feeling when they're expressing their opinions, rather than just trying to please you, like ChatGPT sometimes tries to do.
Yeah.
So it's just trying to get underneath sort of the surface of things. Yes, that requires time, but because you're already in the organization, it can become part of your job, so to speak. I think the hard part when you are a member of the organization already is to sort of do an at-home ethnography, to do ethnography of the organization of which you are a part, because you don't have much distance. It's difficult because you already have a perspective on the organization to add a perspective.
Sure.
And so that kind of distancing can become difficult. And that's what people talk about in ethnography as going native. Like if I had a monk for the rest of my life, would have said like, okay, Boris has gone native. He's abandoned his other life and he's now embraced the monastic life. That didn't happen to me, and I liked kind of being on the edge between being a researcher and sort of becoming a monk.
Okay.
When you are working for Apple and that's your job, it's much more difficult to work on that sort of edge. You are employed by this organization, you're getting paid, you have all sorts of stakes and interests. And so to be able to move back from that and to reflect on what's happening and sometimes ask people specific questions about how they're feeling or what they're thinking, because you're already in a role, let's say as an organizational leader, people might just engage in impression management. And it's actually interesting because that also happened in the Tzu Chi Foundation the first year when we were there. I remember that our informant was somebody who worked for the PR department. And so he wanted to show us the organization, but what he showed us was just all the good things.
Yeah, of course.
And so we kept asking like, okay, this is really interesting, but could we also sit in on actual meetings and see how people are making decisions in this organization? And he kept sort of, saying, well, this will come later.
Okay.
And that's the hard part. If you are an organizational member, to get underneath underneath the surface of things.
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, when you've been living or have been working in the company for years, sometimes it blurs things. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then maybe you're not, I mean, objectivity is another issue. What is objectivity? But when you have already this prejudice, I think it's very hard to be this quote unquote objective. I think that's very hard to do.
Absolutely. That's where these techniques that I was talking about, they can help you create a kind of distance. So let's say at the end of a meeting, like you systematically start taking some notes, not so much about the content, but like, what was it like? Like, what did you observe in the subtle sort of expressions of tensions or conflicts or things like that? If you take notes, even if it's just 5 minutes after the meeting, if you do this over the course of like a month, and you read back those notes, maybe you start noticing certain things.
So patterns, for example.
Yeah, maybe. Or for example, this is something I've become quite interested in, is this idea of drawing movements of people.
Mhm.
If you were to draw where people go in the organization, I'm not a very good drawer, but I just did this recently when I drew the trajectory of going to the daycare with my son on the bike.
Okay.
I made a little drawing, like, here's a stoplight, here's a traffic light, it takes about this long. And I made that drawing. What was interesting is that after making that drawing, it was impossible not to experience that journey in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did the drawing, I suddenly actually understood the trajectory and the process and all the things, the little actions I needed to do, the micro actions that I needed to do in order to get there. I started to enjoy it way more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just thinking about, like, what if in an organization, people would start creating those kind of drawings and seeing it. For example, everybody always congregates in the kitchen, like in our department. That's a place where a lot of things happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or around the office of one particular person. Everybody goes there all the time and hangs out and talks. And why is that?
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of traffic, and then you reflect on why is that the case, right?
Yes. Why certain spaces are created, like in our in many organizations, there are spaces that are created for sort of informal interactions. They put plants and they make it seem very relaxed and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then nobody ends up going there. Why is that?
Yeah.
And so ethnography allows you to, raise those kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. However, there's a $1 million question. For someone who has no specific research training whatsoever, at least not in ethnography, but wants to start right away in the middle of a busy workday, for example, what's one simple mindful shift they could make?
I would say focus on what you're noticing.
Mm-hmm.
Become aware of what you are noticing when you go to work, you enter the building, you start your day. What are the things that surprise you? If you look at it as if you were suddenly propelled into a new culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Look at your own organization as if it was a different culture, an exotic culture, something that seems strange to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very difficult to do that. And when you start doing it, you actually notice that your own organization can be very strange.
Oh, yeah.
And so creating that kind of strangeness, that kind of like, I've always done it in this way, or we've always done it in this way. Why?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those are important moments for change. And also for what I would call agency.
Mm-hmm.
Agency is one of the concepts that interests me. And one of the ways in which agency can be defined is the ability to act otherwise.
Okay.
And so when you realize, this is very strange the way we've been doing it so far, it actually creates a space or a moment of reflection where you think, like, we could be acting otherwise. There's an alternative possible here. Just like what's happening at the moment in the United States, people are at this moment realizing, this is not the country that I want to live in.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it in this way? And that, I think, could be the seed for agency.
Yeah, reflection is key here. And unfortunately, many people, I don't know, don't have the skill or just think that's a waste of time, or I don't know.
Well, there's a researcher at Texas A&M University who talks about the importance of reflexivity for managers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem often with these kinds of concepts is that they're presented as, something that we do besides the regular work we do. We reflect, we need to go into nature, and then we need to reflect on something. No, we're constantly reflecting. While we're in the middle of doing things, we're reflecting.
Yeah.
And so for me, reflexivity is a very practical kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of, like I said, of noticing, of being aware that what we've been doing for many years might not be the right way to do it, or even asking that question. And so the hard part often in a meeting is, because we've been doing it like this for 10 years, to then for somebody to stand up and say, but why? Requires courage, because people might not like somebody to raise those kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's very useful. But just asking those questions, you can stimulate that kind of reflexivity in a meeting. And of course, it's not always time for those kinds of discussions. I understand that. But time can be created for it, and I think it will be beneficial.
I totally agree. Thank you for your clear and practical instructions on how also non-academics can use ethnographic methods to study their own organizations and draw important conclusions for everyday practice. If we fast forward a bit, say a year or two, what kinds of research projects do you hope to be knee-deep in? And are there any new directions or big questions you're excited to explore next?
Yeah, so I've not shared this with anybody, but I have very slowly started thinking and working on a book.
Mm-hmm.
I have only had the privilege of doing edited books.
Yeah.
But I would love to write a book that sort of summarizes in ways that are understandable for everybody the kinds of things that I've learned over these last 20 years.
Okay.
It sounds maybe a little bit pretentious, but I want the book to be about communication and awareness.
Okay, nice.
How this awareness what the awareness that we've been talking about, how it can be thought about from a communicative perspective,
Mm-hmm.
how it can be cultivated in different kinds of contexts, not only in organizations, but also in families, in couples, in political parties. I mean, wherever you can think about it. I mean, that sounds enormously pretentious, but ultimately, that's what I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to share these kinds of insights with people so they can actually be beneficial to them. And I think that kind of a book will take time.
Yeah, I assume, yeah.
But that's the main thing that I'm thinking about. And what could happen is that before doing that, before sort of really working on that book, it might first express itself in the form of an article.
Mm-hmm.
Or I might talk about it at conferences or to other kinds of people, non-academic people.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I would like to work on most.
Cool. So there's no time frame yet. So it will evolve over time.
No, it's funny what you say, because the first time I went to Ladakh, you could see how important these experiences have been for me. But I remember going to the monastery, and one of the monks asked me, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I would like to understand your way of life."
Mm-hmm.
And the monk smiled and said something. I don't remember exactly what he said. He said something like, "How can you understand a way of life that has developed over centuries?
Yeah.
A lifetime or maybe multiple lifetimes to understand what we are doing here."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm trying, when you talk about slowness, for me, it's not slowness, but it's just taking the time that is required for something to, take shape.
Yeah.
And that is something that I'm learning to be more patient with. Because forcing these kinds of writing projects, ultimately, I don't think the ideas express themselves in a clear way.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that in the meantime, I won't be doing other things.
Well, yeah, you have to, right?
Yes. But, if you talk about sort of what's deep in my heart, the thing that I want to work on, or that I'm actually already working on, that's the one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Now it's time for the main event, our quick fire round. 5 rapid questions, 5 spontaneous answers, no overthinking allowed. Are you all set to go, Boris?
Already.
All right, then let's go.
The quick fire round.
What's the most unexpectedly useful skill you've picked up as a researcher?
Outlining.
Okay, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Before I start to write, I used to just write whatever came to my mind, and just sort of a stream of thoughts. And now I've learned to put things on paper first and to think about the structure, but also the larger message that I want to communicate with the article, the kind of audience that I'm speaking to, the transitions between the different sections of the book or the paper. That kind of planning actually then allows me to be more spontaneous and to enjoy the writing process.
Okay, cool. Coffee shop, mountain cabin, or toilet? Where do you get your best ideas?
Mountain cabin.
Mm-hmm.
I love going for walks. I think thinking actually happens more when we're moving.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, thinking is a form of movement. Being in nature, the mountain cabin, we don't have a mountain cabin ourselves, but going into nature, and actually just even in the city, going to a park and walking a couple of blocks or around walking in the park is extremely helpful.
If you weren't a communication scholar, what career would you be pursuing?
First thing that comes to mind is I toyed very much with the idea of becoming a monk.
Okay, so I'm not surprised. Yeah, okay.
I was actually, for a long time, kind of considering staying in Ladakh and pursuing that trajectory. And then I learned to not see that in a dualistic way either. I learned that this particular path in this life can be walked by doing both, by, practicing Buddhism and being a researcher and being a father and being a husband, all sorts of different things.
If your younger self walked into your current office, what would surprise him the most?
That I had more hair. I think that actually, I don't think I would have noticed that much difference, to be honest.
Okay.
Like I said in the beginning, I've always followed my gut and my intuition. And that has kept my career alive. And I continue to try to inject life into this career by doing things that interest me, but also hopefully other people. By continuously relating to other people, colleagues, research participants, and things like that. PhD students I'm advising and master students. It's so wonderful, like where it takes you, and you cannot predict it. And that kind of spirit I had 20 years ago, and I still feel that.
Okay, then final question. What's your favorite non-academic way to explain what you do at a dinner party?
I don't know if it's my favorite because I do struggle with it. I often get the impression that people who are not in academia have a particular idea of what academic life is like. I often then find myself saying, well, but actually we don't have 3 months of summer holidays, but we actually do some work during that period as well.
Yeah.
I usually talk about it that in a way that I study how people relate to one another in organizational context, but also other contexts. And that sounds really strange to most people because how can that be a job? How can you get paid for that? I actually then often reference my fieldwork experiences for giving them examples. So if we want to know how people make decisions in stressful situations like in a war zone, well, you need to go and see what they're actually doing and how they're communicating with one another. If you want to learn about that, you need to go into the field with MSF. And so then people suddenly start to think, oh yes, this could be useful.
Yeah.
And that's what I usually talk about during dinner parties, but not for a very long time.
I can imagine. I've had the same experience. Okay, great. Thank you. That was the quick fire round. Boris, thank you so much for joining me in the lab today. It's been a real pleasure exploring your work, from mindful organizing to the power of ethnographic insight in understanding organizations from the inside out. Thank you so much, Boris.
Thank you so much for having invited me. It was a real pleasure to do this. It was my first podcast ever.
Yay!
I hope it will be useful and interesting to other people.
I'm sure.
Thank you so much once again for inviting me.
That was the Lab Talk with Boris Hubertus Jacobus Marie Brummans. As always, I hope you found something to take with you. A fresh insight, a new perspective, or at least a good chuckle. Personally, I learned that Arnold Schwarzenegger might just qualify as a communication scholar, if we stretch the definition with a bit of creative flair. Something I like to think I'm good at. We also learned how Buddhist principles like interdependence and impermanence can offer more than just philosophical depth. They can help us understand how organizing happens and how organizations come to life through and in communication. Plus, let's not forget, looking for the strange and unusual in your workplace can be very beneficial. It might feel weird at first, but it can spark meaningful change. If you're curious to dive deeper into mindful organizing or ethnographic research, check out the references handpicked by Boris in the show description. You can follow the Community Lab on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podcastle. Subscribe on YouTube and hit the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming lab talks. If you like what you're hearing, a thumbs up goes a long way. Validation is our favorite form of currency. We are also on LinkedIn. So connect with us, share your thoughts, and help us grow this wonderful community of curious minds. That's it from the Community Lab for now. We are taking a 2-month break so I can wrap things up here at HEC Montreal before I embark on my next academic adventure. Europe is calling, but where exactly I land is still written in the stars. Until then, enjoy the rest of your summer. And don't forget, communication is everywhere. It's in what you say, what you don't, and sometimes in the pathetic ways the manosphere defends the orange guy's atrocities at all costs. Sad, dangerous, but also kind of funny. Stay curious and keep the conversation alive.